The Whitford estate sat like a castle above the hills, surrounded by towering oaks and endless silence. Inside its grand halls lived one of the wealthiest men in the country, Graham Whitford, a real estate tycoon known for power, pride, and secrecy. But the heart of the mansion wasn't its marble floors or golden chandeliers, it was the boy no one talked about. Liam Whitford. Only 7 years old, Liam had never taken a single step in his life. Doctors were baffled. His legs worked fine. No spinal damage, no physical limitations. But Liam never walked, talked, or reacted like other kids. He watched the world in silence, sitting in his wheelchair by the window day after day. Graham had tried everything. Therapists. Specialists. Even a live-in caretaker. Nothing helped. Until she came. Her name was Mariah, a young woman in her 20s with a bright smile and eyes that saw deeper than most. She wasn't from a fancy agency or a prestigious college. In fact, she had just moved to the city after helping take care of her younger siblings back home. Graham didn't want to hire her. "She's too inexperienced," he barked. But his exhausted wife, Eleanor, insisted. "Let's try something different. We've tried everything else." And so, Mariah joined the staff as a live-in maid, assigned, above all, to help keep Liam's space clean and organized. No one expected what would happen next. Mariah arrived at the estate with nothing but a small suitcase, a second-hand notebook, and a quiet confidence that confused the rest of the staff. While others tiptoed around the Whitfords like they were royalty, Mariah didn't flinch. She smiled warmly at everyone, even the head butler, who barely acknowledged her, and hummed as she unpacked her modest room in the servants' wing. But it was Liam who caught her eye from the very first day. He sat in his usual place by the window, bathed in sunlight, silent and still. His eyes followed the birds outside but never moved toward the people around him. Not when spoken to. Not when touched. Not even when his parents tried to hold his hand. "Does he talk?" Mariah asked the nurse quietly. The nurse sighed. "No. He doesn't speak. He doesn't respond. They say he's in there, somewhere. But no one's reached him." That night, instead of resting, Mariah took out her notebook and began writing. She made a plan, not just to clean Liam's room and tidy his things, but to treat him like a real child. Not a case. Not a project. A child. The next morning, she walked into Liam's room, not with a duster or mop, but with a storybook. "Good morning, Liam," she said gently. "Would you mind if I read you something today?" He didn't blink. Didn't move. But she sat down anyway. Opened the book. And read. Day after day, Mariah returned with more stories. Fairy tales. Adventures. Jokes. Songs. Poems. She didn't expect a response. But on the 7th day, something happened. As she turned the page of a silly story about a lion who couldn't roar, a faint sound filled the room. A laugh. Barely a whisper. But it came from Liam. Mariah froze. Her heart pounded. She looked up. And for the first time, Liam was looking straight at her. Mariah didn't say a word. She was afraid that if she even breathed, the moment would vanish like a dream. But Liam kept his gaze fixed on her. His lips were parted just slightly, as if he were still tasting the feeling of laughter, something so unfamiliar to his little body that it felt foreign, yet good. "Did you like that part?" Mariah finally asked, her voice soft as silk. No reply. But his head tilted, barely, gently. A reaction. For the first time in years, someone had reached him. Later that evening, she told Eleanor what happened. The mother's eyes welled up instantly. "He looked at you." He laughed, Mariah confirmed, her voice firm but calm. "Only a little. But it was real." Graham was more skeptical. He probably twitched, he muttered. Don't get her hopes up. But Eleanor wasn't listening. She was already on her way to Liam's room, desperate to see for herself. And when she arrived, Liam turned his head to her. It was subtle. Slow. But unmistakable. From that day forward, everything changed. Mariah was no longer just a maid. She became Liam's favorite visitor. His anchor. His only bridge to the outside world. Every morning, she brought him new stories, handmade toys, and silly songs she invented on the spot. He never spoke. Never stood. But every day, he smiled more. And then, came the moment that shook the entire mansion. It was raining hard one morning. Thunder roared outside. Liam was trembling in his wheelchair, frightened by the storm. Mariah rushed in and knelt beside him. Hey, it's just thunder. Look at me. You're safe. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny music box, one her little sister used to keep by her bedside. She wound it up, and placed it on the floor. A soft lullaby floated through the air. And then, without thinking, Mariah stood up in front of him, and started dancing. Not a formal dance. Just something childlike, goofy, playful. She swayed, twirled, kicked her feet, and laughed in rhythm with the tune. Liam's eyes widened. And then, they changed. He wasn't scared anymore. He was entranced. Then, something happened no one saw coming. He moved that it started with a twitch in his right foot. Small. Subtle. Then, his left leg shifted. Mariah froze mid-twirl. Her eyes locked on his feet, her heart thudding so loudly she could barely hear the music box anymore. Liam, she whispered, barely believing what she was seeing. He blinked, slowly, then looked down at his legs. And then, with shaking hands gripping the arms of his wheelchair, he pushed himself up. His legs wobbled like a newborn foal's. For a second, Mariah rushed forward, worried he would fall. But she stopped herself. She saw the look in his eyes, determined. Alive. Awake. He was doing this. On his own. With a deep breath that seemed to pull life into every cell of his body, Liam straightened. And for the first time since he was born, he stood. Tears filled Mariah's eyes. She didn't speak. She didn't dare. Then, something even more shocking happened. He took a step. Then another. One shaky, miraculous step at a time, he walked. Right into her arms. Mariah dropped to her knees, catching him gently, holding him like he was the most precious thing on earth. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. But he smiled. The biggest, most radiant smile she had ever seen. And in that moment, the thunderstorm outside meant nothing. Because inside that room, a miracle had just happened. Downstairs, Eleanor heard footsteps, tiny ones, on the floor above. She froze. Graham looked up from his paper. Did you hear that? Before either could react, the door opened slowly. And there stood Mariah, holding Liam by the hand. Standing. Smiling, for a long moment, no one spoke. Eleanor's hands flew to her mouth, and she let out a sob that was part joy, part disbelief. Graham stood up slowly, like he wasn't sure if he was still dreaming. His powerful presence, so used to dominating boardrooms and contracts, shrank before the sight of his son, on his own 2 feet. Liam. Graham breathed. The little boy looked up at his father, and gave the tiniest nod. The room spun. Eleanor rushed over, dropping to her knees, wrapping Liam and Mariah in a trembling hug. Graham followed, slower, hesitantly. I don't understand, he whispered. He was never supposed to. They said he'd never. Mariah looked up at him with calm, steady eyes. He didn't need more doctors, sir. He needed someone to believe in him. To see him. But what did you do? Graham asked, still stunned. Mariah smiled softly. I danced. The words hung in the air like poetry. From that day forward, Liam's journey became the heart of the Whitford home. He walked more each day. He learned to speak in fragments, then full sentences. He laughed freely. He ran through the halls like he'd always belonged to the world. But perhaps most miraculous of all, was what happened to Graham. The cold, distant millionaire began showing up to Liam's lessons. He learned how to read bedtime stories. He cancelled business trips just to eat dinner as a family. It wasn't just Liam who came to life. It was everyone. And at the center of it all, was Mariah. Not just the new maid. Not just the girl who danced. But the one person who looked past the surface, and changed everything. Months passed, and the Whitford estate transformed from a place of silence into a home filled with laughter, footsteps, and music. Liam's laughter echoed through the halls daily, often followed by the sound of Mariah's humming or the rhythm of her feet tapping as she danced with him across the polished floors. Word spread quietly through the community. People whispered about the miracle boy, who once never walked, and the young woman who somehow reached him with nothing more than kindness and rhythm. Reporters requested interviews. Doctors wanted to study the case. But the Whitford said no. This wasn't a story for the world to dissect. It was Liam's. And more than anyone, Mariah remained humble. She still wore her simple clothes, still helped with chores, and never once asked for praise. One autumn evening, Graham called her into his office. She stood nervously, unsure why the intimidating man had summoned her. But this time, he wasn't wearing his usual sharp suit. He looked human. Soft. Mariah, he began, clearing his throat. There's no gift, no bonus, no amount of money that could ever repay what you've given us. She opened her mouth to speak, but he held up a hand. I've drawn up a full scholarship in your name. Any school. Any dream. All expenses. For life. Mariah's eyes widened. Mr. Whitford, I don't know what to say, he smiled, something she rarely saw. You already said it the day you danced. Eleanor stepped forward and embraced her. You didn't just help our son, you healed our family. At that moment, Liam burst through the door, running straight toward Mariah. He jumped into her arms and whispered for the first time loud enough for everyone to hear, "Dance with me again." Tears filled her eyes as she nodded, holding him close. And that night, beneath a sky full of stars and a yard covered in leaves, Mariah and Liam danced together once more, this time, joined by Eleanor, and even Graham. No cameras. No audience. Just a boy who could finally walk, and the woman who showed him he was never broken. The Whitford estate looked different now, not in its walls or furniture, but in its soul. Gone were the quiet halls and the heavy air of sorrow. Now, every corner of the home echoed with life. Liam, now 8, ran through the backyard in his little sneakers, laughing breathlessly as he chased his dog, Max. His balance wasn't perfect. Sometimes he stumbled. But he always got back up. He always smiled. Inside the house, Mariah stood at the grand piano, going over her university notes. She had just started her first semester studying child psychology, on full scholarship, funded anonymously, though everyone knew who had done it. Graham sat beside her, reading one of her textbooks. Conditioned emotional response, he read aloud. You really think what happened to Liam was because of that? Mariah chuckled. I think Liam didn't need a diagnosis. He needed connection. Joy. Permission to feel safe. He nodded slowly. You're teaching me more than any of those overpriced therapists ever did. From the hallway came a shout. Mariah. Come outside. Look. She turned. And there was Liam, standing in the middle of the yard on a handmade wooden stage, holding a microphone. He cleared his throat. And in a confident little voice that once lived in silence, he said, "This is a song for the person who made me brave." He pressed a button on a small speaker, and music began to play. Then, he danced. Unsteady, joyful, heart-wide-open dancing. Mariah laughed, tears already falling. Everyone, Eleanor, Graham, the staff, came outside to join him. They clapped, cheered, and eventually, they all danced too. Because what started as one small act of kindness, had turned into a movement of healing. And it all began the day a maid didn't see a diagnosis. She saw a child. Years passed. Liam Whitford grew stronger, faster, and louder. By the age of 12, he was running, dancing, even giving speeches at charity galas hosted by his parents, each one themed around children with special emotional and developmental needs. But through it all, he never forgot who started it all. Mariah. Now a certified therapist, she had moved across the country to open her own center for kids like Liam, those trapped in silence, waiting to be seen. She called it, the first step. One crisp spring morning, Mariah returned home to find an envelope in her mailbox, handwritten in blue ink, no return address. Inside, there was a note, "Dear Mariah, I'm walking into my first day of middle school today. I tied my own shoes. I made my own breakfast. And I'm bringing my favorite book to show my friends, the one you read to me the day I laughed for the first time. They still talk about you at the estate. Mom cries sometimes. Dad's nicer than ever. And me? I'm not afraid anymore. I don't remember what thunder sounds like. But I remember your dance. You taught me that walking isn't just about legs. It's about courage. Thank you for giving me my first step." Liam Whitford. Mariah stood on her porch, tears running down her cheeks, hand over her heart. She looked up at the sky, smiled, and whispered back, "You did the rest." 20 years later. The auditorium was packed. Hundreds of people, educators, parents, scientists, therapists, sat shoulder to shoulder, eyes glued to the glowing stage. Tonight's keynote speaker was already a legend in his field. Dr. Liam Whitford. Now in his late 20s, Liam stood tall behind the podium, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit. Confident. Calm. Respected. But tonight, his voice trembled slightly. Because this wasn't just another lecture. This was the speech of his life. He took a deep breath and looked out into the crowd. And then, he saw her. Mariah. Sitting in the front row. Older now. A little gray in her hair. But the same gentle fire in her eyes. Their eyes met, and Liam smiled. Then he began. I was the boy who couldn't walk. I was the boy who wouldn't speak. And I was the boy most people gave up on. He paused. You could hear a pin drop. But one person didn't. She didn't have a degree. She didn't have a title. What she had, was hope. She didn't treat me like a patient. She danced in front of me while a storm raged outside. And in that moment, my silence broke. My legs moved. My world began. He turned, stepped away from the podium, and walked toward the front row. The camera lights followed him. He reached out his hand. Mariah rose. He guided her to the stage. And before a standing ovation of hundreds, they danced. No music. No choreography. Just a slow, quiet dance. Like the one that started it all. 10 more years passed. The Whitford Foundation had grown into an international movement, building child wellness centers in over 40 countries. Schools now train staff not only in therapy and medicine, but in empathy, creativity, and human connection. Each center had one thing in common. A small bronze plaque at the entrance that read, "Inspired by the maid who danced." Mariah never sought attention. She stayed behind the scenes, always saying, "It was never about me." It was about Liam. But the world remembered her. Liam, now a father himself, visited her every month. One spring afternoon, he brought his daughter, Olivia, who had just turned 7. "Do you remember this place?" Liam asked gently as they walked through the Whitford estate's garden. Mariah, now in her late 60s, smiled from a bench. "I remember that window," she said, pointing toward the room where it all began. "Where a boy watched the world from behind glass." "And now," Liam said, lifting Olivia onto the bench beside her, "that boy teaches the world how to see each other." He handed Mariah a worn-out notebook. Her eyes widened. "You still have this?" It was her old journal. The one where she wrote every story, every plan, every moment she shared with Liam during those early days. Inside was a new page. Written in Liam's handwriting, "Your kindness was never small. Your courage was never quiet. You didn't just help me walk. You taught me how to live." Mariah didn't speak. She just held the notebook to her heart. And as the sun set behind the garden, Liam and Olivia stood before her. And danced. One slow step. One small miracle at a time. 30 years later. The world had changed, but the lessons remained. At the heart of the newest First Step Center in Chicago stood a large marble statue, of a woman mid-twirl, one hand extended as if dancing with an unseen child. Underneath it, gold lettering read, "She danced first. So we could all stand." Inside, children played, learned, and healed. Therapists guided them gently, volunteers read aloud in every room. Among them was Olivia Whitford, Liam's daughter, now a young woman in her 30s, a pediatric counselor, and director of this very center. One cloudy afternoon, a new child arrived. A girl named Isla. 8 years old. Never walked. Didn't speak. Didn't smile. Olivia watched from her office window as Isla sat alone by the window in her wheelchair, just like Liam had, once. She remembered her father's words, "She didn't fix me. She freed me." So Olivia closed her laptop, grabbed her old speaker, and walked down the hall. She entered Isla's room and knelt beside her. "Hi," she said gently. "My name's Olivia. Do you mind if I show you something?" Isla didn't respond. But Olivia stood anyway. Pressed play. And danced. Same soft music. Same slow, playful steps. A legacy passed through motion, not words. At first, nothing. Then. A twitch in Isla's cheek. Then. A giggle. Then, a spark in her eyes. And Olivia smiled. Because she knew. It was starting again. Soft piano music plays. Black screen fades into light. Images flash across the screen like old home videos, a young Mariah dancing in Liam's room. Liam's first shaky step. Eleanor crying in the doorway. Graham kneeling beside his son. The family laughing under the stars as they danced together in the garden. Voiceover, adult Liam, soft, reflective, "They said I would never walk. They said I would never speak. But they were wrong. Because one person believed in me." More images, Mariah handing Liam his first book. Liam reading to other children. Olivia opening the new First Step Center. A bronze statue of Mariah, mid-dance, in the courtyard. Voiceover continues, "She didn't have all the answers. She didn't come with money, or titles, or degrees. She came with heart." Liam giving a speech. Mariah watching from the crowd. Olivia holding Isla's hand. A small foot twitching. A smile. Then, final image, Mariah's old notebook. Open to the very last page. Handwritten in bold ink, "You don't have to be perfect to change a life. You just have to be willing to dance, first." Fade out. Text on screen, inspired by every unsung hero who sees the child, not the condition. The legacy continues. She danced first.